Teacher, this Roman official would like to speak with you. It seems like he has a request. Word of you has been getting around the area.
So, for my entire life, religion has been part of uh, my experience. And being Assemblies of God, that's a fairly conservative denomination. So, growing up, I watched all the Veggie Tales. One of my favorite bands growing up was Reliant K and Barlow Girl and Jump 5. Man, we had some great, but also some terrible, like, pop acts. But, like, while Under Oath and other Christian bands of the ilk, such as the Devil Wear Prada, at that time were, like, innovators in their genres. And you had the classic that is Veggie Tales. One of the things that never gets talked about is Christian video games. Now, you can say, okay, Christian media kind of cringe. A lot of times it is. It's a lot of just kind of sitting around and repeating the same things that everyone has heard, except in a different context. But what if we made a video game based on biblical stuff? And that's what we're focusing on. We're going to be focusing today on our Christian video games fun. And this is going to be an emphasis on games that are based on the Bible or Christian media. So growing up, my dad is a pastor. We would sometimes tag along to his staff meetings. And in his office, he would have the NES. And on top of a bunch of classic games like Super Mario, Hogan's Alley, Duck Hunt, Star Tropics, we also had a copy of a game called Bible Adventures. Bible Adventures was a game by a publisher called Wisdom Tree that was never officially licensed for the NES, which is kind of funny. Like, they're circumventing anti-piracy measures on the system to release a Christian game. That was actually a compilation of 3 games. The 3 games are Baby Moses. We have Noah's Ark, and we have, I believe it's David and Goliath. Now, these 3 games are basically the Wish version of Super Mario Bros. 2, which we could get into the whole thing that Super Mario Bros. 2 is just a reskin of another game, but that doesn't matter here. The most famous example of this style of game is Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, playing it, the general gist is each of these 3 different games use the mechanics of Super Mario Bros. 2 to a different goal. The first one, Baby Moses, is you are attempting to get Baby Moses from one end of the map to the other. The second one is Noah's Ark, where you're trying to round up the animals and throw them into the ark. And the third one is David and Goliath, where you're trying to find 4 sheep on each level and deliver them. Now, you may be saying, oh yeah, like, I played Super Mario Bros. 2. It's fun. And it is very fun. The original Super Mario Bros. 2 is still one of my top 5 platformers of all time. But Bible Adventures isn't. The controls are clunky. Like, the smoothness that you expect out of Super Mario Bros. 2, not there. And you may be wondering, why are you saying smoothness about Super Mario Bros. 2? Like, out of the original 3, it's arguably the least smooth. No. I used to think number 2 is clunky, and then I played this game. Plus, they do push the limits of sprites allowed on screen to the limits. One second, I forgot to mute my phone. And frequently, it looks like a rave is going on screen while you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to be doing, which is great. It's always great when you're trying to locate a sheep and it keeps flashing in and out of existence 5 times a second. Now, is that saying the game's all bad? No? Question mark. It does have some interesting mechanics, like the fact you can carry up to 4 items at once and cycle through those, which is fun when you have a sheep, a bear, and a squirrel all stacked on your head and you're throwing them at other sheep, bears, and squirrels in David and Goliath. And one of the most, this sounds terrible, but the enemies in, like, there's tweaks between what the enemies do. The enemies in David and Goliath are just bears and squirrels, and they'll try and knock you down and make you lose health. The enemies in Noah's Ark are few and far in between. It's more about your platforming prowess and being able to navigate the different kinds of animals. The enemies in Baby Moses try to drown the fucking baby. And I played this as a kid. Baby drowning. Which was one of the funniest moments. I was sitting there playing it, and I'm just like, I do not remember this from the original game. They took the baby, chucked into the river, and that was game over. So the games do have some personality, even though they're based on the same engine. But this brings me to to the first problem that I have with Christian games. In the game, there are tutorial notes that look like little commandment tablets. Understandable, fits especially with the Moses theme. Half of your tutorial tablets are scripture verses. I understand it's a Bible game, but the problem with that is, one, if I'm trying to get some information on something and I grab 5 tablets in a row that are all scripture verses, it gets frustrating because I need that information to be able to play. I do not have a manual for this game. And the other side of it is they don't even always relate to the story that you're talking about. The scripture verses that show up between levels do. But sometimes I'll be playing Noah's Ark and I'll get a scripture verse from Philippians. Philippians has nothing to do with Noah's Ark, and I don't know why it's there. Problem 1 with Christian video games is that they kind of steer onto the preachy side. They're trying to throw out stuff that interferes with the game flow because they're seen as ministry and educational tools and not purely as entertainment. That's why I liked VeggieTales. VeggieTales was able to work that stuff in. I thought I muted my phone. VeggieTales does a great job of working that stuff in. Bible Adventures does not. And speaking of mechanics not lining up with games, let's get to the next one. As a kid growing up in conservative Christianity in the late 90s to early 2000s, there is one common thing that I feel like every kid that went through that era dealt with, and that is Revelations. For those of you that don't know, Revelations is the Christian book of the Bible that revolves around the end of the world, the rise of the Antichrist, the destruction of the world, millennial kingdom, which I'm still not sure if that's completely biblical canon or if that's canon to this next franchise, Left Behind. Left Behind was a book series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins that was a full-blown franchise. If there is a Christian media franchise outside VeggieTales, it's probably this one. They had 20-odd books, about as many in a young adult series, multiple movies, including one with Nick freaking Cage playing a pilot who's having an affair, which I haven't watched that one. I really do want to watch that because I wonder if the general tame nature of Christian movies can be matched by an unhinged Nicolas Cage trying to keep a plane from crashing. And that's not spoilers. That's literally the beginning of the entire franchise But also went into video games. And I was so psyched as a kid when I saw this because I was all about those movies. Those movies were those books. Sorry, I was all about those books. Those books were some of my favorite books growing up. Left Behind Eternal Forces, someone turned a biblical book about the end times, or a book based on the Bible about end times. And I'm going to use that phrase, book based on the Bible and not biblical, because there's a lot of questions there, and it comes down to interpretations and if the literalist perspective taken by the authors is accurate. And turned it into a real-time strategy game. Now, on paper, sounds ridiculous. And if it wasn't for the fact that the words RPG is generally, or the idea of role-playing games is generally frowned upon in Christian culture, I think a RPG would have been a much better way to go with this franchise. But I was pleasantly surprised. The game Left Behind Eternal Forces puts you in the shoes of the Tribulation Force, which are post-rapture Christians, which I might put an editor's note here to explain what rapture is, because I'm using a lot of biblical terminology in this one that I was not expecting to dig up. Puts a bunch of post-rapture Christians that are basically a missions force in this godless society post rapture. And your whole mission is to go around evangelizing and being able to defend yourself from the global community, the UN stand in that acts as the villains in this series. And there's some great mechanics. For example, you do not actively build anything in that game. What you do is you have recruiters or missionaries or whatever you want to call them, and there is a bunch of neutral NPCs on the field that you can recruit to your cause that join your team. That's how you build units. You recruit them and then you send them to specific structures, which are just unoccupied buildings in New York that you convert to whatever you need. Like, you need food, you go there, you put an engineer on that building and they renovate that to be a cafe. You need construction workers, you build a technical, I'm trying to remember what they call it. Is it the learning center? I think it's the learning center. They build a learning center in that building, and then you have the ability to create engineers. They also have this really interesting system that's called the faith system. And there's 3 tiers. I believe it's 40 and 60. Below 40 is global community. Basically, you've been diluted by the Antichrist, Nikolai Carpathia. The original Nikolai Carpathia, much more intimidating than in the later movies. All the clips I've seen of the later movies, not a great character design. But that's besides the point. And above 60, that is your tribulation force, the forces of good in this game. And you can raise and lower spirit by taking different actions in the game. Now, this is where the game devolves. And this is why I was mentioning mechanics not lining up with gameplay. The developers themselves have said that the option to use military force in this game is possible, but the tribulation force will lose people quickly because of the impact of like the violence on their souls. I'm like, that's understandable. But within 15 minutes of the game, I solved that problem. You see, every unit in the tribulation force has a ability called prayer that raises their points. And it's like, okay, I think their logic was if you pray, you will, like, that's time you can't be spent fighting. If you're fighting, you're decreasing. So you have to balance the 2 out. No, you don't. You take 2 worship leaders, which basically will raise the faith of all the people around them, and you just go on a rampage. When they talk about, I think it was it Deborah? I'll probably put a note correcting here if I remember it. Leading the charge with song. That's what turns out here. You could be like, oh yes, I am going to try to be communicative. Or you just see an engineer and you roll up with 12 guys with M16s and 2 people singing "How Great Is Our God" like it's like they're stuck on that airplane. The mechanics kind of start to lose the grip. Also, the kind of condescending nature of some of the comments that you hear towards non-believers, and it matches the tone of the original books, where it's a very much holier than thou perspective. The opposite of praying in this game is cursing. Now, I don't think if I was a Christian, which I currently do not believe, if I prayed twice in a day, I don't think me saying fuck would balance out in people's eyes. And the way that things are described with like roaring guitars being a weapon of the enemy, very much a traditional Christian standpoint. Probably pretty similar to that worship leader video where it's like, no, you need to play very simple. Like, even if it's good, you need to play very, very basic. Or the people that are like, nope, we need to sing hymns. It very much hinges on that kind of classic mentality. So, is the game fun? Yeah, ish. It's a strategy game. I got bored within 2 minutes of trying to play multiplayer, and then I figured out that trick about the rampage. My suggestion would be you play the later versions because all three are the first three main games between the original Tribulation Force and Rise of the Antichrist are pretty much all the same, just with like better balancing and patches and more missions. I would do Rise of the Antichrist, and yeah, no, it's a fun game ish. It does get watered down. I think those mechanics in a different real-time strategy game could have been groundbreaking. Give me like a French Revolution or like a country that's at war, and just slap that over the game and publish it and make millions, because it would be a big shift in the gameplay of most strategy games. Yeah, there's potential, but I do not think that where it's at is I don't think it's very good overall, because it runs into that media of you're not going to show someone left behind. And this is something that like a lot of Christian media has touched on, like Fireproof, VeggieTales, the concept of passion plays. This misses the one thing that everything else does. Those things put the biblical stories into reality. Left Behind Eternal Forces gives you repeated points that don't really give you much, and then big walls of text between missions that talk about different topics and the very conservative viewpoints on them. That's my biggest issue with Left Behind Eternal Forces, is it tries to be a Christian game, but it feels like a better game covered in poop, as they try to My problem with Eternal Forces is that it could have been a great game if the resources had been devoted to making it an actually fun game. Which kind of leads me to my next point. Game 3 that we're talking about is strictly a result of meme culture, supposedly, and the rise of independent games being published via Steam. And I'm talking about the game I Am Jesus Christ, which I played the prologue edition of. And man, this game is the best of the three. Maybe not technically, but as far as gameplay, it was the coolest of the three. But honestly, despite the fact that Left Behind can conflict with so many different scriptural interpretations, and generally throwing children into the river is not a great thing for a video game's reputation, this might be the most controversial. You want to know why? Because Jesus can lose. That's right. In this game, you can lose a fight as Jesus against the devil, literally. It starts off pretty simple, and it feels like a budget Bethesda game, which, considering the current game's free, totally worth a shot at trying. The current one, I believe, goes up through I think it's through the healing of the centurion's son, which is a cool story that they make officially 10 times weirder by having you literally be shrunk down into the child's body and you go around zapping the viruses. You see why this might be controversial? You see why Jesus doing physics puzzles in the spiritual realm might be controversial? You see why Jesus getting in a Jedi power battle with Satan and deflecting orbs of light and using a grappling hook with the devil might be controversial? This game might be the best of the three. Objectively. Subjectively, definitely the best of the three.
Terrible
but
line.
This runs into problem 3 with, honestly, I'm going to say it now, why making a solid Christian game based on the Bible or based on like strictly on faith is nigh impossible. And that's because video games are a medium based on player choice and interactivity. And when you introduce choice or interactivity, you need to build mechanics that are engaging around that. For example, if there was just a hold to heal child, that would not be an engaging use of an entire chapter of the game. For Jesus walking in the desert, That would not be an engaging use of time if you got to the end and you just had to press buttons to say no. So what does the game do? The game introduces elements to represent, or introduces physical elements to represent spiritual concepts that are going on. And I'm going to defend this. You know what? I might as well do a whole video on this one, because this one is, I think this is an underrated work of genius in progress. That whole Jedi power battle takes place at the time where Jesus would have been tempted, which, like, okay. I think it's awesome because it shows kind of the struggle between the human part of Jesus and the divinity, that he is fighting off the temptation in order to hold his ground and say, no, get away from me, Satan. Which, like, is stuff we did in Sunday school growing up. Like, I don't understand why people are butthurt about this. When there are dark crystals around Galilee, there's no implication that anyone else can see them. You want to know what the implication is? That is foothold of the devil there, which, honestly, knowing conservative Christian rhetoric, this is very much how things would have, like, how it could be represented in a game. This game has gotten a lot of flack for blasphemy. I think that right now, the place that the church is at, this game is a little too much creative liberty. This is maybe not to the same level of, I'm not going to say distaste, because honestly, I thought the idea was hilarious. This is not to the same level of probably controversy as the show Black Jesus on Adult Swim. This is definitely a game that takes a lot of creative liberties, and it got flack for it. But here comes the final thing. The issue with this. While I said it was the best, the biggest flaw that runs into, outside of the fact that it's controversial as hell, those you theology and I think it's hermeneutics nerds are going to be all over that joke. It is definitely a game that maybe strays a little too close to a educational tool. You don't get to connect with the impact that Jesus had in these moments. There are dialogue options. All of them, you don't really get to take any creative liberty with Jesus. And there's not really a huge, it might just be the fact that it's still in an early access mode, but or when you do these miracles, it feels like it's telling. It doesn't feel like it's showing you the impact. Now, let me pitch my perfect Christian game. My perfect Christian game will be able to dodge all three of these bullets. It will be able to dodge the interruption of game flow for experience. It will be able to dodge the idea of being too preachy and condescending. And it'll be able to ditch the idea of being a educational tool rather than an experience that you would want to play again. Give me a game about Peter. Yeah, I'm talking Simon Peter, the dude that chopped off a guy's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. Give me a game about him. Give me a game about a rough and tumble dude who probably was so off the deep end. Give me a game about him seeing what happened in those moments. Give me a game about the interactions between the disciples when they're away. Give me humor. Give me humanity. The problem with Christian games, Christian movies, and a lot of Christian music is that it loses humanity in an attempt to be something divine. But the biggest problem is you have to connect with someone on a human level before you can talk about them or talk with them about stuff like this. Give me a game where the impact of the events you're showing me are real. Give me another That Dragon Cancer, where it's not necessarily saying all these specific stories or this is right, this is wrong. Show me what the faith has done in a real situation. Do Christian games suck? Yes. Do they have to? No. I think if Christian games stopped looking at the Baptist Church, Sherwood. Oh, second one. And that was just about faith and kind of trying to overcome what was going on. It was great for a Christian movie because it was a human situation. It didn't devolve, like it did have its typical call sermon, come to Jesus moments. But it was great because it was about faith in a stressful situation. And like I said, That Dragon Cancer has already shown how great games like that can be. But in order to make a good Christian game, you're going to have to make it human. And because of how disconnected those stories are and how much people want to put you in the shoes of these great heroes, these great idealized heroes, we probably will never get that. Which kind of sucks. Because there's some cool stories in the Bible. But that's, I guess, how Christian media goes.